Okay, welcome everybody to the panel discussion on the predictive analytics world climate this afternoon. Happy to have you all with us. And we have a very selected and great round of experts with us with whom we want to discuss the following context. We all know that we have almost one of the larger crises of our time behind us, which is the COVID-19 crisis. And over that time, it was always the question, do we now forget maybe about the longer running stakes that we have regarding climate, but also regarding water, biodiversity, and all the other things? And it turns out, no, of course not. This is a mega trend and a mega topic that needs to be addressed, and regulation and stakeholder action, and so all goes along that route. So we were interested to find out in this discussion round what AI technology can contribute, particularly also how helpful AI really is, and is Europe, for instance, prepared to lead in climate-related technologies, AI technologies, lead the climate movement. We also want to discuss a bit what political and legal changes, technical infrastructure, economic conditions, and so on are required to strengthen the technology community regarding sustainability and climate change. And with that in mind, we want to jump right into our panel discussion. And I would like to use the first few minutes to have the panelists introduce each other, and then we go into the discussion round. So maybe we start with Ludovic Bodin from the chair. He's the chair of international investment and co-founder from France AI Hub. Maybe you spend a few words introducing yourself.
Yep, thanks everyone, and thanks for having me on this panel. So my name is Ludovic. I'm an investor and an entrepreneur. My background as an entrepreneur is actually in gaming, in video games, and as an investor, I've been focusing on gaming, but also applied AI, blockchain, and overall tech. Among the applied AI company that I invested in were related to climate. I invested in a company in Paris called Alea, which is an AI platform as a service with a strong focus on the European sovereignty and tackling some of the most important verticals that relates to CO2 emission. As you mentioned, I'm also the chair of international investment for France AI Hub, and with France AI Hub, we also funded the European Applied AI Alliance, which is around 7 countries right now: France, Germany, and the Nordics. Around 11 organizations, which you've got the logo at the bottom. Danish the Danish Technical Institute, FCAI, Fortis, the Hub of Francia, Applied AI from Munich, from TUM, Technical University of Munich, AI Open, Norwegian Open AI Lab, ICAI, RISE in Sweden, Sintef in Norway, and VTT in Finland. And most recently, we actually work on a report that I'm just going to go very quickly here through, which is the first mapping of AI, applied AI and climate startup, where we've been focusing at identifying a promising startup that relates to applied and AI and agriculture, applied AI and industry, mobility, energy, building cities, and a few others that relates also to AI. These categories, 5 categories, are probably familiar with most of the audience. They are the main source of CO2 emissions, and therefore some of the focus of organization. Very quickly through it. So the founders, some of our team members. We identify over 200 companies in agriculture and ecosystem and industry, in mobility, energy, building cities, and a few others that have also like a very interesting angle when it comes to AI and climate. I'm not going to go too much into the details. This report is available on the European Applied AI website, and you can download it for free. And we're also about to launch and release a new report that will actually go beyond climate and in general look at companies, interesting, innovative company from Europe when it comes to applied AI. That's it for me. So very nice being with you guys, and looking forward to the discussion with everyone.
Pleasures on our side. Thank you very much. Daniel Rohr, can you say a few words to yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for having me here on the panel. My name is Daniel. I'm data scientist with a company called Trax. We are an AI company based out of Berlin in Germany. We have about 15 employees, and we are about 3 years old. We work on CO2 emissions and let's call it more fuel management for fleet owners on the road, right? So that's your typical truck owner from 1 to can be thousands. We use data that is collected by the trucks on the road to optimize their fuel consumption. And this directly translates obviously to CO2 emissions. We are involved in a community called the Smart Freight Center based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, where international standards for CO2 measurement on the freight industry are set. Also, we are active in the ISO that is about to be released probably next year. And for us, it's important when we talk about CO2 that we are able to measure first, right? So that's the first step, and that's let's say a problem currently. And we do that in order to then later on optimize the fuel usage and the CO2 emissions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Bosse, Rothe.
Oh, thank you. Well, Bosse, I'm one of the co-founders at Cleanhub. I have a background in quantitative finance, actually, from Harvard and Copenhagen Business School. And yeah, we are now with Cleanhub, a very young company. We're now around for about 1.5 years, and we spent about the last 3 years investigating the ocean-bound plastic problem. And what we do is essentially that we try to build a seamless way for consumer goods companies or any companies that want to be part of such a solution to take action on ocean-bound plastic. And our focus on that is really to build the most reliable supply chains in the recovery of plastic in high-impact regions, so that the collection of plastic in, for instance, a coastal site in India can be done fully traced and with full transparency into what is really happening. So we really focus on our work on digitizing the supply chain, making them robust, and making sure that everything goes smooth after the contribution of the company has been committed. That's us.
Very good. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Nicolaus Hanowski.
Yeah, good afternoon. So my name is Hanowski. I'm at the European Space Agency. I'm responsible for all Earth observation missions in operations at the European Space Agency, and for all the data management that is relating to these missions. I think I have a specific stake in this discussion when it comes to space-based climate observation. We're already flying missions such as Sentinel-5P, which are analyzing atmospheric compositions. You may have seen some of these pictures during the COVID crisis, some of these images where you can see that the NO2 emission has been reduced dramatically due to the reduced industrial activities. These came straight from our Sentinel-5P measurements. And when it comes to AI, I think I have 3 domains where it's highly relevant. We use AI now experimentally and to some extent already operationally to pre-select data acquisitions on our satellites. So we have onboard AI on our satellites to pre-select target areas. Then secondly, AI, of course, is most relevant in the context of data processing and data analysis in particular. So the extraction of relevant information from the data products coming from our satellites. And then finally, there's a new AI domain, I would say, which is more related to data modeling, the modeling domain, in something that we call predictive Earth observation. In climate and in weather and meteorology, we already have the potential of predictive analysis, and we are trying to expand this towards other changes, anthropogenic changes on the Earth, but also physical changes. And here again, AI is also relevant. So we have 3 layers in which we are employing AIs in order to optimize and to maximize the output from the satellites.
Great, thank you all of you for your introduction. You see, we are a great expert round of panelists here, and maybe to kick the discussion off, one a bit suggestive question. What do you think about European climate goals, also regarding Green New Deal and the implementation area and so on? Do you think it's ambitious? Do you think it's enough, or do you think it's not enough in the various legislation? What is your take on that?
Who wants to start? This is the most controversial question from the whole panel discussion.
Well, maybe I start, and I'll probably say what everybody will think anyway. But it's never ambitious enough. So is it too ambitious? Of course not. And is it enough? It's never going to be enough. I think you mentioned in your introduction that maybe COVID kind of postponed the effort on climate, which maybe is true. But I also feel like the COVID maybe became a catalyst for like maybe a stronger call to actually action to really fight the climate change right now. So I think it's not enough, and maybe COVID kind of postponed a little bit. But at least from an investment point of view, I feel like there is clearly a stronger interest now than anyone could have even dreamed a year or a year and a half ago.
I mean, I read in a report that the investment capital, venture capital for ClimateTech startups is growing 10 times faster than for ClimateTech than for AI. Yeah. So I mean, this is a clear signal from the market how important this topic is.
Yeah, and also purely from an investment point of view. There is funds in the market, but there's also a lot of funds right now in preparation, and it's almost become mandatory for LPs, for limited partners who actually invest in those funds, being institutional or family office, to actually deploy some of their capital available into climate change. So I think we can somehow thank COVID for that.
Yeah, that is true. And on the same page, let me ask, what is your stake on the role that technology will play? I mean, we are on the predictive analytics world, so we are just discussing about the role of technology to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Myself, my company, and we are residing in Zurich, in Switzerland, and so we had this rather grief outcome from the Swiss Democratic Act yesterday, where the 51% of the Swiss population voted against a stringent CO2 legislation in Switzerland. So this will kind of stop the country for some time quite to act on climate change more severely. So this is not something you can solve by technology. So what do you think is more important, or how do you weigh between technological aspects to fight climate change versus education, versus culture, versus many other things?
If I may?
Yeah, of course.
Please feel free to speak up.
Yeah. I think one of the keys is really to be a bit clearer about the concrete impact. I think climate change is something that is dealt with on a global level and is still a bit abstract for a lot of people. One of the big advantages of the third domain that I mentioned, where we are employing AI, this predictive Earth observation approach, is that we're changing the scale from global to regional to local. And with these measurements and with these modeling capabilities that we are employing now, and in the end, it's really a matter of sheer computing power. We are able to really give realistic predictions on the local impact of climate change, and I think that will change. And in some instances, there are examples where the climate change is being felt on a local scale. It's really making the difference for people and their perception and how to react. For many people, it's still a global issue that is not concrete enough.
Could you give an example of a predictive Earth observation use case? So,
what we are looking at, for example, is crop yields, agriculture. If you can give a good estimate of a certain area under a specific pattern of local climatic changes, then you get a better understanding how people will be directly impacted, how the economy can change. I mean, on the constructive side of this is it takes the discussion out of a very, let's say, passive mode. You can start to think about how you actually respond to this, in addition to putting a barrier to climate change overall. So it takes away the sense of paralysis, of inevitability that people feel sometimes when they don't understand the concrete situation and how to position themselves towards it.
Yeah, it's true. My background as an entrepreneur is in gaming, and I invest in quite a lot of gaming company. And if you play any game, you need to understand the rules if you want to win the game. And I feel like most people right now, investors included, and governments maybe also, maybe don't understand the rules on how we can win against climate change. So if you look at the structure that, for example, we use for mapping in Europe, that was actually popularized by investment fund led by Bill Gates, Breakthrough Energy Ventures. And the fact that some leading figures in tech are popularizing this concept, these rules on how to win the game, I think is a really good first step. And as a second step, I think we have a clear example here with at least 2 startups in our panel discussion. What you can measure, you can improve, and if you can visualize, you can predict, and if you can actually automate, you can actually scale. And I think the fact that we have so many companies right now, very innovative, with like top entrepreneurs and top technologists in Europe who are focusing on the measurement to later on kind of make the rules of the game clear and start improving, I think it's quite unique. And having a view on both Asia, being based myself actually right now in China, and also USA, I feel Europe is clearly on that side, leading the pack.
I'd be curious to hear. I mean, it's an impressive picture, right? That you can see from space, basically somehow the yields of crops dropping. I would assume now. You didn't explicitly say that, but I think you see the changes. This is how I understand. I'd be curious to hear whether you can also see something in your data, I guess, that makes you believe that you know what needs to be changed. Is that something that where you say, well, actually, when I look or we look at the data, is there something where you say, see, this is an important lever, probably not one, maybe 10, or I don't know what. I'd be very curious to hear your point of view here.
It's exactly the key point in what we are trying to do with this predictive Earth observation. This is not to get a specific forecast or something. It's about running scenarios, so that you can change parameters in the models that you run with the Earth observation data that we are dealing with, and that you can look how specific changes in your policies, specific changes in your technology, and specific changes in the concrete interaction of people with their environment can have on certain outcomes. So the ability to really influence this, and this is where this whole high performance computing business becomes really, really important in order to be able to calculate all these scenarios and give policy advice to the people who make the decisions on what specific initiatives, specific rules can actually change the outcome. And that's what we are working on. And that's exactly what also the European Union is asking for us.
Do you have can you give us a peek preview? Do you know anything that, well, I'm really curious. I mean, as much as you can share, obviously, I understand that maybe not everything is for the public.
Transparent, and it's we have a program in development called Climate Change Adaptation. So the adaptive part is really here at the center, and it's really to understand, for example, what happens if you shut down this type of fossil fuel plant in a country. What happens to the local, to the regional, or the European outlook on the climate impact? It's on this scale. If your legislation on licensing electric cars, how is the number, the gradient of increase of numbers of cars impacting and counteracting another policy that you have, for example, on air pollution? How is that affecting the overall scenario? So to be able to concretely play these scenarios and to understand outcomes and impact of concrete countermeasures is something that is being asked for and that we are trying to provide by a combination of Earth observation. And this is where you come in. I mean, the AI and IT community need to be able to talk to each other on this. And I'm a planetary scientist by training. For me, all of the AI discussion, the machine learning discussion is not something that comes very natural to me. So I think a big challenge that we are talking about is really fusing communities that have very different cultures. And I take our exercise here as one of the initiatives.
I can very much relate. My background is in quantum chemistry, and I also made the transition, obviously not too long ago. However, what I can say is that the modeling experience that I have from quantum chemistry is very helpful, and mathematical skills and scientific experience is very helpful to navigate these. Well, uncharted territory in some sense, I want to say, right? Okay, so it's very interesting to hear what you say. I have the feeling what you're saying. You're thinking about optimization a bit of let's say the Earth interactions of the people of the economy, and I was wondering like how this also relates to, let's say, what we do at Trax. We're also trying to optimize in some sense, right? Because you still want to transport your goods from A to B, right? And so you need some trucks or something to do it. And also, Bosse, I was wondering, aren't you also somehow, in some sense, trying to optimize something that's there already, right? You're not doing something new. You're trying to optimize. You're trying to help. You're trying to mitigate, in some sense, as we do too, right? Because still the trucks will be on the street, at least I think for a while, right? It's not. So I'm interested. How do you see this?
Well, for us, we're often creating something new. So the plastic, if we don't collect it, it's typically ends up in the ocean, right? So we have to create and incentivize to be able to pay for the transfer and for the treatment and for all of the things that have to be done. I think my point of view, and I just wanted touch on that with Europe, I think we've now heard a lot of positive sentiment, which is true. I think we are in a unique time of change, right, where it seems like we're getting a lot of positive momentum right now. At the same time, I think we need just much more actions, optionality to take action today, where really something happens. I think that's something where we've also seen now more and more initiatives coming out. It's a mega trend right now, but we're also still very much in children's shoes there. I think that's just needs to be realized. And also, if a lot of the answers are not even there yet, so we need to do a lot of innovation still. We will need a lot of startups coming out, and that means we need a lot of capital that goes to young ventures who want to innovate and create something new. That's what is needed, right? If we want to make the goals that we have in mind, we need to create something new. And I still see a struggle in that. So in the US, the investment landscape is a different one. The risk taking sentiment is a different one. The amount of conviction investors is just larger. And I think that is something where we also need to be prepared with our investment landscape to also back these bold ideas that sometimes still need a bit of research and a bit of boldness, and might not look like another e-commerce shop or another SaaS solution. Just simply has a different risk profile. So I think that's something to look out for too.
That is the usual thing that comes now over the decades. That we have supposedly less amount of capital here to spend for small companies in Europe than in the US. However, I'm not sure if this is totally true. I'm not sure how you see it, Ludovic, because once I see it also from a quality perspective, the companies that get good funding in Europe is the quality of these companies is very good. And my take is that there is enough. If you have a good product and if you have a good story behind, then you also have the possibility to get capital in Europe.
I very much agree with you both, and I think like the funding, you always need more. It's like ambition. You always need more ambition, and but the reality is like there is already a lot of funding available. If you look at France alone from a funding point of view, and I'm not talking about AI specifically, but in tech in general. Like France had a program with the Ministry of Economy called French Tech to really push tech companies and attract foreign investors. France became the #1 spot right now for investment in continental Europe. We had like 2 unicorns. Now we are like over 15, and our objective was to get 25 by 2025. We're going to easily beat that objective. So from a funding point of view, there is enough capital, and more capital is always welcome. I think right now, I would say, and talking about from an entrepreneur point of view, we invest in California, Asia, and Europe. The main problem I find with European companies is actually maybe being a bit too conservative. The Asian and the American tend to be more bold in their prediction. They also may be a little bit better in measuring and showing their prediction when it comes to revenue and telling stories when it comes to fundraising. So I think Europe really needs to step up on that. Capital is there. More capital is needed, and more capital will come. But the European entrepreneur needs to really also step up their job, both in terms of ambition and in terms of like ability to measure, showing their prediction and telling the stories that will excite, big investments.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would agree to that. That capital is there clearly, but it's more the mindset that I mind. I think this is a chance. Yeah. Well, this is also a big crisis. This is also a chance to build some industry-leading companies, big companies that own the space internationally, and Europe is in the pole position for that. We see also, our customer base is majorly in Europe because we see a strong trend of sustainable consumerism and sustainable awareness, and there's capitalism backing a sustainable movement, which is very powerful. But yeah, it's a mindset thing, and I agree. It needs, of course, the founders, but it also needs the investors who think in those terms. And I can also say that is not always the case in the European investment landscape.
Yeah, but if you look at investment right now, like you've got tons of funds from both Asia and the USA, like Sequoia included from USA, who are basically hunting for European startups because they're actually pretty cheap compared to their peers in America and Europe and Asia. I got a story for you guys that I thought might be interesting. I talked with some Chinese entrepreneur and American entrepreneur about this panel, and asking them who are in the tech industry, not necessarily in climate only. And I asked them, hey, what do you think of the future of Europe related to AI and climate? And the American was like, oh, for us, the real things that we care is business, commerce and being richer, being with advertising or e-commerce or whatever. So ultimately, it's going to be, because we're doing really well at that, it's going to be difficult to say, oh, now entrepreneurs should focus on climate. And the Chinese entrepreneur are like, oh, you know what, for us, we really care about lifestyle. Like it was a tough life before. Now, it's all about lifestyle. Like we have a lot of people going out of poverty. We want convenience. We want lifestyle convenience. But actually, if you look at the European, like we have the lifestyle. From a wealth point of view, we're probably not that focused on that much. Like we're probably okay overall. But what we have is we have tons of industries. And if you look at the source of CO2 emission, well, that's a lot related to constructions, where we have a lot of very big companies in Europe related to that. Mobility, where we have a lot of very big companies also that relates to that. Agriculture and so on. So I think the fact that Europe is so focused on the source of the CO2 emission, like industries, and the fact that maybe for us lifestyle and wealth is not the most important, but actually the environment, I think makes Europe a really good place right now for startup to be funded and to be invested and hopefully to scale. My concern right now is more on the scaling side. Out of all the companies we've looked, the 200 plus companies that we put into our mapping, very, very difficult to find companies who are more than 15 people or 30 people or maybe 60 people or so on. Like if you have 60 people already in the space, you're kind of the biggest guy on the street already. And if you compare to other business in US or Asia, obviously companies tend to scale way faster than that. So I think a need for cooperation will be and maybe merging visions and merging companies will be super important.
Yeah, and I mean curbing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Bosse, you announced that you got a funding a few days ago. Could you just tell a little bit of the story, how easy it was or how hard it was to get this funding?
I think it went really well. I think we had a really amazing process. Really, I mean, obviously you talk to a lot of investors, and we got a chance to speak to a lot of really brilliant people, and and got now these amazing investors to back us. So we're really happy. But we also, we were always compared to other solutions, and I think there are very few solutions that there's a lot of measuring and creating more awareness and creating more transparency, but there's very few solutions to actually do something like real impact. Really, like in our case, collect plastic and make sure at the end of this year we will have less plastic entering the oceans, or we make plastic just a tiny bit more circular. There's very few solutions of that out there, and that's something that became very apparent in our fundraise, and it was probably a very good thing for us. But I think that is just something that we need, and I want to touch to your other point, which was that somehow there is this capitalistic drive for the US to move on this, and then this is a sustainability move. But I mean, in the end, if we want to reach these targets on the timeline that we've set ourselves, it only will work if we curb capitalism in a way that these two the sustainability incentive and the capitalistic incentive are are merged together. And I think that that's really what's lacking, and that might also be the reason why we have been in the past so slow, seemingly, with where charity often, at least in our area, where charitable organizations were charged to do these kind of things, where now suddenly it's for-profit organizations who jump in and try to combine these two aspects. I think that's really what we need to see much more often. Yeah, we need.
Maybe just a comment on where the public sector can help. I think one of the big secrets of the US and also of Chinese startups is that the government in China, in particular regional governments, for example, are huge customers for the services that are being generated by small companies. And so I think the entrance barrier for small companies are much larger in Europe, because big institutions, whether it's meteorological or other types of data, it's difficult to get your data into the value chain. And we see the example of remote sensing companies in the US that, of course, take huge volumes, good budgets, also from the reconnaissance sector and these things.
Absolutely.
So a lot of coast environment.
Yeah, I would say in Europe we have the public sector doing something differently, and this can still help startups if you have the right business idea, I think. So what we do see a lot is, of course, regulations. And regulations always mean that the players on the market, they have to play by the rules, as Ludovic, you said earlier, right? When you play a game, hey, and those are laws, right? And regulations, and you know them, so you play by them. So one thing that we are seeing is the whole CO2 pricing discussion is helping us, right? There is the feeling in the market, and I think this is going to happen, that you have to measure your CO2 impact somehow. And the freight industry is very clear. They have a huge impact because, I mean, they're burning diesel it's very clear. Everybody knows that. And so it's clear that this will probably be one of also the first ones that have to do it, right? And then companies like to be also future-proof, and then they look at solutions already if the regulation is not in place yet. Not everybody, obviously, right? But at least early adopters. And this is what we see, at least with some of our customers, that they're anticipating basically regulations and are looking for international standards and try to, be ahead, basically.
You're touching on an important point, which I also wanted to make and put back to the audience. What are you thinking is the real driver in the sustainability movement that we see in Europe now? Is it regulation, as we touched now upon? Is it the market movement, or is it the risk awareness, so to say, that's coming with climate change and so on? I can maybe underpin this with a story. We used satellite data quite intensively to make an ESG due diligence product for a real estate investor. And why was the investor interested in helping them with the ESG due diligence? Because there is sustainable finance disclosure regulation active since March this year that says that investors, institutional investors particularly, have to be informed about ESG-related impacts and risks when they are presented with an investment opportunity. So here it was the company with whom we work with, they are also producing very nice ESG reports, and they are also saying that they want to be green and looking and working with GRESB and other ESG-related established bodies in real estate. However, the final go for that project and for the product development we did with them was the SFDR. So is it still the regulation, or is it now, what do you think? Is it now more also the market or risk drivers that lead companies to engage in climate tech?
If it won't be only a regulation, I don't think it would be enough. I think there needs to be incentives for people to be successful on the market as well. I mean, there's a cultural thing, of course, as well, and European identity, that's a big topic anyway. And climate is something, and the concern for the planet is certainly something that can generate identity. And in the particular setup of Europe, with all the different nations and countries trying to find a certain level of identity, this becomes a big thing. No?
Yeah, I think also it's people, right, that drive it somehow, and I do think in Europe, at least before Corona, it really looked like there's a big movement, right? And now let's see if that is still there and how it develops. But I think that can really be a driver in Europe, and that I think translates in Europe rather quickly into regulations. That's maybe a European cultural thing, but I believe this is how it works just in Europe, let's say in general, right? And then a lot of market will just follow, and things will happen in some way, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot with our customers, and I think it's quite clear that it's a consumer movement, right? I mean, the consumers goes into the supermarket and votes every day for the more sustainable products more than they did yesterday, and they will do so even more in 10 years. Who knows how supermarket will look like then, and how much of that will be plastic packaging, how much of the products will be CO2 neutral or even positive. I think that's really what is this capitalistic movement that drives brands and companies to act, and which is something very healthy. But we also still have so much to do that it can't go fast enough, right?
Yeah, talking about speed and also kind of a secret sauce for startup. Taking the example of France, the government is financing quite a bit the growth of the of AI and climate in France, financing overall actually quite a bit the growth of venture capital investment with BPI France. And when it comes to AI and climate, the French government launched a series of public tenders with multi-million dollars or multi-million euros budget per contract. And now there is similar tenders going on at European level. For startup alone, it's very difficult to reply to any of this contract because it's usually too big for a startup of 20, 30 people to basically be credible enough to get a multi-million dollars, win a multi-million dollars contract from the government or from EU. But the secret sauce of at least one of the companies that I invested in France and more that we are looking at right now is the fact that they mutualize. So the fact that per project, they suddenly create a kind of a mini joint venture per project. And the fact that there is company from France and Germany and Finland and so on involved, suddenly you become unbeatable, because it's very, very rare to have German and French and Swedish and Finnish and so on to be together and serene multi-million dollars contract from either government or EU directly. So I think it's actually a really strong accelerator, and it's also potentially a first step for further cooperation between this startup. We already bought one company. One of the company that we invested already bought another company like this. Other company also put they did some swap in terms of equities. So Europe can actually become suddenly in a decentralized way can become a very strong platform.
I mean, there's a number of programs that offer also research grants or money also for startups. I know in Germany for sure, but also in Europe, and I'm pretty sure research institutions are often very welcome also in these joint ventures, also bigger companies, and of course international as soon as it's European money. Those are not contracts; those are really. Those are grants in some sense, right? Sometimes it's a loan, sometimes it's not a loan.
I mean, we are looking at a lot of these startups, and we get a lot of proposals for funding also in the European Space Agency. And what I often see is that what you would need for a successful business case is the full spectrum of capabilities and expertise in a company. What we often see is we have a strong tech focus, or we have a strong economy focus, or we have a strong marketing focus. It needs usually about a dozen of different qualities and different expertises to be put into the right combination to be really successful. And I think that because we were talking earlier about the cultural differences between different domains, if we are able to overcome these differences among ourselves a bit, and if the quantum physicist starts to talk to the economist, and if the economist starts to talk to the risk analysis, to the data scientist, then it becomes a bit of a different, and not to forget about the legal people. We're talking about the legals often as well, and my experience, especially with the legal profession, is the more they can really relate to the concrete issues and not stay in an abstract legal layer on what they're doing, the more they become actually a key component, which is then enabling this entry into the legislation domain that we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, and
I think we have only 4 minutes left. I would like to open also the discussion for the audience. So if someone from the audience has any comments on it or questions, please use the chat window. So I have one question, and it was also on the list, and I think it's a really critical question, because nowadays we are talking about regulating AI, because AI is also a big source of CO2 production, because it consumes a lot of energy. What's your thoughts on this? So is it, on the one side it's a climate killer, on the other side it's the climate rescue? What do you think?
I think it's like with all things, right? It's a question of investment and return on investment, right? If I spend 1 ton of CO2 to save 2 tons of CO2, it's worth it. If I spend 1 ton of CO2 to save only half a ton, it's not worth it. And sometimes we just don't know before. That is also a problem, right? That is absolutely true.
Yeah,
but you calculate the CO2 consumption of your models?
I'm sorry, that was...
Are you calculating or forecasting how much CO2 your models, your analytics is producing?
My computers? No, we don't do that.
But it should definitely go in these equations. I mean, this is exactly the scenarios that I was mentioning earlier. And I mean, I had another one that, because you were asking earlier about the predictive Earth observation part. Take ice coverage. This is not meteorology, this is not climate directly, but ice coverage is a key factor in how the globe will develop. Also economically, the ice that is blocking the Northwest Passage, for example, may change completely the trade routes around the globe. That may be extremely bad for the Arctic environment. It might be actually good for the CO2 output, because the routes will be shorter. So I think what I'm saying is things are extremely complex and need to be looked a bit in an analytical way, that it's still handleable and resolvable. So we should not overwhelm people, but on the other hand, we should tackle it by interdisciplinary joint forces. I think that's a bit the way that I would see forward.
So I hope this conference is a good starting point for that.
Well, I was thinking, like, preparing for this also a bit, and I said earlier my background is in quantum chemistry. Not so long ago, there was a big paper where an AI was able to do some folding of proteins, which is in my field, right? And it was a very big thing, and I had comments like, okay, now there's so many scientists out of work because now AI can do it and all that. So I was wondering, or I would hope we find a way to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, right? Mm-hmm. Harvesting CO2 out of the air. That is actually taking CO2 out, right? Because everything that we are doing currently is maybe preventing, right? Or just reducing or something like that. But wouldn't it be great if we find some chemical ways to actually bind the CO2 that is in the air and make it into a chemical like a solid, ideally, right? A rock. That would be perfect. And then it's sealed and it's never back in the atmosphere again.
Before we go into geoengineering, I think we need to be very clear about the robustness of our models and predictions. If we are tinkering with the system on top of the problems that we are trying to solve, there are risks here as well. Advocating.
Okay, I was trying to be a bit bolder, right? I heard today that the Europeans are not bold enough, and I'm also not really suggesting geoengineering, right? That would be something else, but we know that the CO2 concentration is very elevated compared to centuries or even millennia before, right? And if we are able to somehow harvest CO2 back to a level where it's, like before, that would be a nice goal, let's say, right?
Yeah, we will do that. And that's definitely
when you're talking about the predictive analytics for healthcare, because there are those topics like synthetic biology, how you design organisms that, for example, bind CO2. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, or we all already are out of time. Thank you so much for your contribution, and I would love to see you next year, hopefully in Munich in person, so we can take a look on what happened during the day, during the year, and also see how this community is evolving. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion.